Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of the Great Design Podcast. And today I've got my co host with me, Emmanuel.
Hello, guys. Good to be back again.
And today we have got an interesting guest to kick off this new drop with us. His name is Nick McEvily, and it is wonderful to be here with you today.
Oh, it's good to be with you guys. Thank you.
Yeah, nice to be with you, Nick.
Yeah, so let's get into it. So in today's conversation, we are going to be exploring Nick's journey. He's been an entrepreneur for much of his career, and as well as a designer. So it's always a fun and interesting conversation when we get that mix in our guest. We're going to delve into his experience across multiple pivots that he's made in his career. And I'm just going to hand it off to Nick to get us into that, to be honest. Like, Nick, tell us about your background. Where did this all begin? And yeah.
So I started my journey in the design world at Cornell University in upstate New York, studying human-centered design. And I examined design through three different lenses: product design through ergonomics, interior design, and building design. And in grad school, I chose to learn about UX design a little bit as well. And so I really dove into design in every aspect of the word and have been applying that knowledge to starting companies for the last 12 or so years.
Wonderful. So you said you had like that nice mix from interior design to UX design. What kind of thirst for knowledge was driving that?
I guess I realized that design is very fluid, and it's a privilege to work in a field where you can use your mind in different things, in different ways, different industries. And so that's one of the reasons why I fell in love with design, because it was very empowering. The world is fabricated by designers and engineers. And so it got me really excited to see how I could use that skill set and really test it and stretch it into different industries and in different modalities as well. And so I kind of settled in software design and UX design and digital product design, but I still keep a strong candle in my heart for interiors. I think we were just saying before we started the episode that I'm working on some interiors right now, and just love working across the disciplines, because that's one of the benefits of being a designer at large.
All right. Okay. So which brings me into the multiple different businesses that you've sort of run, and just building ideas from scratch. What has that journey been like for you, and what are the different businesses you've sort of dipped your toe into?
Oh man, I've worked in gaming, I've worked in blockchain, AI now, health tech, and it's been a privilege to work in all those industries to see how they can relate to each other and how you can transfer knowledge and lessons from one industry or situation to another. I would say that the journey began with a lot of ideas. My wife and friends can admit that it's like a living Shark Tank episode with me. Like, I think of business ideas all the time, and I pitch them to anyone that's around me. And so ideas are really not in short supply for me. Choosing the right idea is the hard part. And then once you have that idea and it's working, maintaining that fit with an industry is another repetition of the same muscle, actually. And so I decided to dedicate my career a long time ago now to testing new ideas, using design to test new business concepts, business models, go-to-market strategies and things, because I realized that was going to help me be a serial entrepreneur for the rest of my career.
Nice. So, for example, I mean, anyone who goes through your website can see your wealth of experience, first of all. But then more importantly, there are statements around just finding and maintaining product market fit, which is something you've referenced right now, where you have a boundless amount of ideas, but it's in choosing the right idea that is going to be the most impactful. So if that's one of the most important skills for an entrepreneur, can you elaborate on why it's so crucial then for you to, one, be able to choose the right kind of idea, and then two, to be able to then find the product market fit for that idea, and as well as continue to maintain it or evolve it?
Sure. Yeah, I think product market fit and choosing the right idea are kind of the same thing. One doesn't happen before the other, because when you're trying to find the fit, you have your idea and you have your person. right? You have your product and you have the person or the market. And if one doesn't fit the other, you have to change, the opposite. And so you're either changing the market that you're serving and keeping the product, or you're changing the product and keeping the market. And I think a lot of business owners and founders believe that once you find a product, your work is done and you just need to scale the team and keep working. But especially today, with the momentum and the pace of change in the technology market and any market, I would argue that these products need to shift and constantly find their fit, right? Like regulations are going to change, new technology is going to come into the landscape, new habits are going to form, new attitudes are going to form in society. And so you're going to have to change the way your product addresses that market. And it all comes back to the same muscle, which is listening to your customers really intently with a strong, repeatable process. And that's what I've continued to do throughout my career, and really discovered that during my time in Chicago. When I moved to Chicago, I was dropped into the center of the startup ecosystem there in Lightbank, which is the VC that the Groupon founders started. Brad Keywell and Eric Lefkowski have changed the entrepreneur landscape in Chicago single-handedly. And I was really fortunate to be the head of product for their agency of record. So I worked a lot with their portfolio companies, got a lot of exposure to different companies, different industries, different stages, and have basically polished it there and then have applied it since.
Yeah, quite interesting. So when we talked about during our first call, you mentioned about Mode Mobile. So can you tell us about Mode Mobile? And you also talked about experiencing 4 pivots with Mode Mobile before achieving significant growth. So can you walk us through one of those pivots, and what were the key learnings, and how did they ultimately lead you to product market fit?
Sure. When you're going through a pivot, there's stuff that you'll kind of throw away and there's stuff that you'll keep and you'll maintain and try to bring forward with you. And so in one of the pivots for Mode, we were working with influencers of different sorts, and had kind of an ad model with them where we would create a blog specifically for their brand. So it was like maybe Cheech and Chong or Snoop Dogg or a couple of artists who had really large Facebook followings. And we would build a blog for them and post that blog to their Facebook page, and would split revenue for the traffic that came from their post. And after a while, Facebook realized that we were doing that and it was against their terms of service. So the entire operation shut down overnight. And we needed to salvage a piece of that. And what we ended up salvaging was the relationships with those influencers, with those celebrities. And we were able to build products for them in our next iteration of the company. And so with every pivot, I would say take stock and see what you can keep and what value came from that episode or that era in your company's development, and try to bring some of that value forward with you.
And in that regard, I mean, you've just told that story where the pivot was as a result of external factors, right?
Right, exactly.
Ultimately, what are some of the common misconceptions about product market fits that you see a lot of people carrying around, especially founders today?
Revenue is actually deceiving as a product market fit indicator. I've seen a few B2B SaaS companies that have a client that pays them a recurring contract, and that is a large portion of the income for the company. But the features that they're building for that client are not applicable to the rest of the cohort that they're and the customer base and personas that they're trying to serve. And so what they've done is sacrificed a good portion of their company's focus to pursue revenue and keep things going. And sometimes as a founder, you have to keep the lights on, you have to find revenue, and you have to chase that down. But I would just recommend considering what the cost is there on a long-term basis if you aren't going to be creating things and building things that are more broadly applicable and will help you grow in the year, 2 years down the road, instead of creating technical debt or relationship debt with these clients that served you well early on, but aren't potentially the long-term user group for you.
Yeah, apparently, when we talk about like product market fit, right, from the standpoint of a startup, right, essentially for every startup, like when you're solving a problem, you expect to definitely get paid in one way or the other so that you could sustain yourself. So you have a product, people are willing to pay for it. So how can it be deceiving? Like, I just want you to dive a little bit into that, because
Sure.
it sounds counterintuitive to me. Yeah, just want to understand.
It does, and that's why I mentioned it. I think aside from building features that are only serving a fraction of your market. I would also say revenue is one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is cost. So if you're spending, especially for venture-backed companies, if you're spending tens of thousands of dollars to acquire a customer and that lifetime value of their customer is $4,000, then you're at a huge deficit. And although revenue is showing it, you're not properly showing it in kind of total outlay or return on investment. And so in that case, and in a couple of others, I think revenue, it's a strong traction metric in combination with other things. So I wouldn't rely on revenue on its own. I think it needs to be considered in concert with some other indicators for PMF.
Yeah.
No, I was sort of agreeing with that, because I mean, with the example you've just given, it's a classic case, right? Sometimes there are just things that are completely out of your control, that it's the way the market is changing. It could be a response to technology, and we know this pace at which tech is moving these days. And even though, yes, revenue is coming in for your idea today, if you take that in isolation, what if other factors change? And then what happens? So yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. I think I also love the balance, the way you really said that. So let's talk about validating ideas. I like the standpoint where you said so much about your introduction as a product designer, interior designer, and also I think you mentioned physical products, right? You also into physical products, which gives a lot of varieties of ideas or products when you are working. At the beginning of every business or every idea, what are your go-to method for validating an idea, even if it's a business idea, before maybe investing time into it or your resources? Like, what are the things that you look for, like, oh, this idea is actually going to be valid, so I think I should invest more time and resources into it?
Well, I mean, a lot of us are designers here, so I would start with that. That's the superpower, is to create something in pixels that could eventually become code, and gathering feedback on that thing as soon as possible, and being really smart about the person whose opinion you're getting. As designers, it's just as easy for us to design an interface as it is for us to test that interface. But a lot of us skip the second part. And then if we do the second part and we test that interface and that prototype or something, we might choose the wrong person. And so really being sure that you're gathering input and feedback from someone who represents your audience. And if you're not a designer, because I think there's some other folks joining us that are not, don't have a strong skill set in design, even though tools are getting more accessible these days, I would say to do something called a jobs to be done interview. And a jobs to be done interview is kind of nuanced. I would encourage, the listeners to take a listen to this or look into jobs to be done. But basically you're examining a similar situation that someone has found themselves in before and how they solve that problem. So if you're looking for transportation options in a city and you're creating a new scooter company, or let's say it's a tricycle company and no one's ever used tricycles for transportation before, you can ask them about a previous experience that was similar. Like, have you used a scooter, or have you used one of the bikes? Have you used a cab? Tell me about the decision-making process to use that service. And this is a really vital for anyone who's testing a new idea, to ask about a previous experience that mimics or simulates a similar concept as yours, or similar scenario as yours. Not asking them about a hypothetical question. Would you use this? Does this sound helpful? Those are going to give you really misleading questions or answers that, will suffer in terms of believability and might direct your product in the wrong direction. So that's why I like prototypes and designs, and also using jobs to be done style interviews when I'm testing new concepts and new ideas.
Okay, we've now validated that. For people who are not designers, who are listening to the episode, for example, you've talked about the jobs to be done framework. But I'm curious, but if the way to not go is asking people leading questions like, oh, what do you want to see? How do you think this can help you? And things like that. How then would you define what thorough validation is? How do you've talked about jobs to be done, yes, but how does a person know that you're validated enough to move on? Because it's very easy potentially to also get stuck in the loop of trying to validate for so long that you
absolutely, we have to move beyond just the interview, right? We need other vectors. We need competitors and our competitors doing similar things or exploring similar ideas. And we have to be cautious of that as a vector alone. I think this directs a lot of CEOs is to find feature parity with competitors, but those competitors haven't done the right process of inquiry either. And they're just kind of parroting other competitors. And so you'll see these echo chambers in certain industries where there's a feature that no one in the industry is using, but we have in every product and is set as some sort of standard. So that vector alone can't be considered. So, but if you take the competitive landscape and you pair that with the interview results, and you pair those with some history of like what similar consumption trends have appeared in, tobacco, like how is tobacco informing cannabis, or how did database structuring in cloud, how is that informing cryptocurrency? How is a diet from the 90s affecting diets of the 2020s, So there's ways of looking back and how history kind of repeats itself. So now you've got these 3 or 4 vectors that you're combining to get a more complete picture of whether or not your product has some fit. And I completely agree that you can't just choose one and believe one. So you have to create a group of these validation mechanisms and look at the picture that's being painted by all of them.
Would you say then, I have a follow-up to that, would you say then that this is where things like understanding, like you've talked about the competitive landscape, but then things around trends analysis is also important, because you've referenced being able to look at other industries and understand the value chain across these things. How is one X informing Y? So for someone who might not necessarily then be able to grasp that level of complexity in that, being able to look across industries into seeing how those, where does one begin with that kind of activity?
Well, if you have a budget, you can buy these reports that are done by people who do have that cross industry knowledge and can interpret it for you. Those can be kind of pricey. If you have a student in your ecosystem or network, you can potentially get some really great academic and industry reports through students for free or at a discounted rate. But you've also got, outside of those, you've also got AI. AI is has a ton of tools for competitive analysis these days. I'll let the listeners do their own diligence on those. Nothing in particular to recommend, but there's obviously a really great opportunity there. And then I think, good old Google search, you can't go past that. And one of the things that I feel like is a secret weapon for me are subject matter expert interviews. So just like we would go out and do an interview for a customer, I do a very similar process for subject matter experts in a specific field. So right now I'm getting smart on photogrammetry and neural image radiance fields, or NERFs. And I don't know anything about that, but I know this guy in Stanford who wrote his doctorate on it. And so I looked him up, got in touch with him, had an hour call. He's recommended a bunch of different resources for me. And people who are curious are, more likely, I think, to get responses when they pursue that curiosity. So a lot of this stuff is just, choosing what is right for you. If you got a budget and some time, I'd buy a report. If you got some curiosity and an interest in like finding out the subtleties in an industry, I would reach out to some subject matter experts. And then you've got, the more conventional stuff in between.
Oh, nice. Even though those photogrammic things sound so scientific and sound so scary, I wish you well in your adventure. And, just to say, you've been the founder for like 3-4 times, I believe. So I believe those journeys are not new to you. And talking about some of your superpowers, which you mentioned, is about being able to really conduct those interviews with subject experts. As a 3-time founder, what are the practical steps you've used in conducting customer research, and helping you to validate ideas, like in gathering meaningful feedback? What are those practical tips that you will say, okay, this is what and how you should conduct an effective customer research?
Sure. This one is going to be directly for the designers and anyone who understands how to use a virtual whiteboard. So one of the hacks I've found in this process occurs at the end of an interview process or a program, is during the synthesis portion and during the note-taking portion during the interviews. So when I'm in the middle of an interview and I'm going through my questions, I'm writing down my notes in Post-its in a whiteboard. And I'm using the jobs to be done style forces diagram, which has 4 quadrants: pushes, pulls, habits, and anxieties. And each of these is kind of a category that I'll map the note to. So as someone says something to me, I put it into the right quadrant. Each of those has different colors. Encourage folks to look up what the forces diagram looks like. Don't want to spend too much time on it, but once I've done 6 to 8 of those interviews, I've got 6 to 8 quadrants. I'll take each of those pieces of notes and I'll plot them on a user journey map and do what's called affinity mapping. And so I'll cluster feedback from each of those interviews into common themes that fit inside of the customer journey map. And where pushes overlap pulls on that customer journey map, there's potential for product market fit. And that's where you should be exploring more, either through a strategy or further research.
That's quite precise. Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah. So you've mentioned not wanting to dig in a little bit. So I guess it's more for my curiosity. So you said where the pushes and pull exists is where you potentially have the opportunities to explore potential opportunities, basically. Now, are there scenarios in which, as much as you're following the jobs to be done framework and you're going through the process you've described, are there still scenarios in which one needs to be mindful of sort of biased information making its way into what you're creating?
Absolutely. I feel like you have the answer to this question. And, how have you avoided bias in the past in composing questions and things and conducting interviews?
Oh dear, you're pushing it right back to me. Oh my God. Yeah. Okay. All right. I would say that mostly it's with customer goals and the needs that sort of helps drive the alignment regarding what we should focus on, because it's very easy to look at data and paint a picture of what you want to see from there. And a way to ensure that you're sort of staying away from personal bias is then making sure that it completely or continuously aligns with whatever user goals and needs we might have recognized in the first place, and sort of keep that balance going. Nick just made me...
I couldn't agree more. Well, I think I would battle bias in product development the same way I battle bias or prejudice in any environment, which is to bring in more perspectives. And so when you're putting together your interview script, bring in the opinions of sales leaders, of marketing leaders, of customer support. All of these people have really valuable perspectives on the product direction and its impacts up and downstream. And so getting those voices involved will help reduce bias in the questions themselves. But also as an interviewer, as someone who's doing the exploration, you need to stay open-minded and really open-ended with your questions. You can ask pointed questions, but really what you want to be doing is like illuminating an area of their life and how they think about that part of their life and moving through it and the problems that they reach. And too often someone will ask a really pointed question like, well, when you're caring for your elderly parent, do you miss medication frequently? And that's a really leading question. You're like, yeah, I do miss medication. Everybody misses medication. Like you're asking the question to get a specific answer that you kind of already know the answer to. And I see this all the time. And so that's a great example of bias. And the way that I would reframe that is when caring for your aging parent, what are some hurdles that you've encountered? Just keep it more open-ended, and you'll be delighted to see how that changes the responses you get.
Okay. And we're now going to sort of go into that building MVP phase. Now we've talked about the ideas. Let's go about, you validated this wonderful idea. What's your approach to building an MVP? Or shall I ask first of all, because I'm hearing some people don't agree with MVPs. So let's first of all get your take on MVPs before we talk about them.
I'm still an MVP person. I know what it means to me, and so I know it's been stretched to mean a lot of things, and I think seeing more as a minimum serviceable product these days, it's like, give me something that I can sell. That's an MVP, and that's not really what I learned an MVP was. I think an MVP is something that you can test and that is close to functioning the way you need it to, but only enough functionality for you to start learning. That's where I would pick up the answer to the question of where do you start with building an MVP. We're really in a great place, especially as designers. Right now, it's a great time to be alive, to be building businesses, because there's so many tools that you can use. As designers, we're familiar with things like Figma Illustrator, the whole Adobe, suite. And, now there's Canva and all this other stuff, but there's website tools like Webflow and Bubble that are allowing you to build and design really, responsive front ends for websites and back ends for websites. And once you have those two things, you've got the ingredients. Some are doing both to at least put something out there that you can test and get some opinions on. Sometimes it's just a splash page. Sometimes it's an advertisement with no product or at all. You just put an ad out there and pay to get some clicks on it and see what the analytics tell you. But I would refrain from the old wasteful mentality that you should go out and hire a developer to go and build the thing that you came up with in a vacuum in your head and then go and try to sell it. Because time and time again, I've seen hundreds of thousands and millions of dollars wasted on that approach. And so, as designers, we have the skills at our disposal to go and test these ideas in mock-up form or, sometimes in functional form through these no-code platforms and get results to see if it's worth pursuing that idea. And so that's why I was so excited to chat with you all, because I think that there's a fire to be lit under designers to be more entrepreneurial and to think about what businesses can be created, because we are some of the best people to be building those businesses.
Sure. I can't argue less with you. So talking about this MVP of a thing, right? When we look at being a designer trying to create MVP, I get myself in this shoe of having so many ideas. Like every founder, definitely, when you have an idea, you have so many ways you want to go. Now, how do you then cut the chase? Because the idea is to have something viable to present to your customer. How do you cut the chase to find the essential features, for that MVP, for you to just avoid complex or just building all the features at once? Like, how do you boil down to those essential features for the MVP?
I think it comes down to what people will pay for. And people pay for things that live at the intersection of two qualities. It's two types of pain that happens frequently and pain that happens severely. And so if you can build a feature that is addressing some frequent, severe pain, and you've validated that you can sell it to that person, that they'll click on the buy or explore the advertisement, or you have a partnership or channel partnership that will get you in front of your customer really reliably, and they'll say yes, then I would say go and pursue that idea and start to invest and get other people invested in your idea, and use the tests and the traction that you've gained at that point from your ad or from your landing page or from your surveys to convince those investors that this is a good idea and it's worth some more time and energy.
Now, let's move into, we've gone past the initial product market fit. Your MVP is great, looking good in the market. Let's think about scaling and beyond. At this point, what are the key considerations that a business now needs to be taken, or at least what should be top of mind to ensure that this business continues to grow and does not die?
Yeah, revenue, definitely. You know how I was saying it's a tough early indicator? It's the most important indicator at a later stage. When you've got your product to market and you're making some money, you've hopefully been able to tweak and adjust and optimize your acquisition channels and reduce the cost of acquiring a new customer. And you've got some customer service or account management or some sort of maintenance mechanism for your customers. And you're thinking about what new markets to get involved with, what big partnership can you go after, what is the wild thing that you can do that will bring your company into the next stratosphere. And this is the point where I really encourage the founders that I work with is to do something really daring, like reach out to, a billionaire or reach out to a celebrity for their endorsement. Like do something that you think can't be done. Try to get in touch with that person, because now is the time. Now is the time for you to take big swings and invest in yourself and get other people on board with your vision, because you've done a lot of the hard part. And now the future is basically repeating what you did to get there. Because that's the whole thing with product market fit, is that it's a cyclicality. And if you can stay on top of it over time, you'll stay on top of the market.
And okay, so in this phase where the battle is now, we gotta be top of mind for everything and everybody. How does customer research evolve in this phase? As well as how does a company continue to keep their eye on the prize, which is customers?
Yes, great questions. At this stage, you've got dozens of customers, maybe thousands of customers, depending on your business model, which means that you have people who have really strong opinions about your product. And so you need to be talking to them. Sometimes they're talking to your company already, though, and that might happen in two ways: through your sales departments or through your customer service departments. So staying in touch with both of those department leads or key members on those departments is a really, really great way for you to be staying in touch with your customers, what their big issues are, what friction points they have in sales. And I really encourage UX designers, product managers to shadow salespeople, to shadow customer service, in addition to having their own UX research programs, because that's how you keep this machine fueled, by representing different perspectives of these departments, making sure that they feel like their problems aren't at the bottom of the barrel, and that you're, as a product designer, looking to solve them to reduce the weight on customer service or to make it easier for a salesperson to demo the product. Those are your customers as well, as a product designer and someone who's building an organization. So yeah.
Yeah, so you mentioned different departments in that aspect of oiling the whole product, right? I think you mentioned quite like two different departments. So let's come to hiring. When you've kind of started a company, you talk about scaling and beyond. What advice do you give to founders when it comes to hiring plans at the early stage of building a company?
The advice I give to founders at the earliest stage of building companies and scaling them is to find what you're really great at and do that full time. Don't stretch yourself too much beyond that, and delegate everything else that you're not great at. Organizational structure can look very different depending on the industry, depending on the existing team composition, but it really comes down to complements and finding people that complement your communication style, your management style, and early on need to be doing both strategic, leadership, visionary work, as well as execution and tactical stuff. And so look for those types of leaders early on when you're hiring a team, because those people will then be able to hire best for themselves as they have a secondary tier below them because they've done the work themselves already. So those are the two pieces of advice I give.
So in balancing that part of the question, right? So what are like common challenges that you've seen that companies do face when they try to scale up at that level?
This is an old adage. I don't think this will be new to any entrepreneur, but hire slow and fire fast. Those are the two things that I would recommend to folks: is take your time in the interviewing process with people, not too much, obviously. Try to keep it in like a month or so because they're a hot commodity, supposedly. But do your diligence, have a structured approach to hiring, get other people involved who'll be working alongside them or managing them. Don't just do it as a founder or a C-level executive and then hand them off to the team. Everybody should have a voice in that hiring decision early on. That'll reduce over time, reasonably so, just to maximize efficiencies. But I think early on, trial or decisions by committee on hiring are really helpful. And give people equity. I think equity is a really big motivator for folks, especially if you can demonstrate and show that its value is going up over time. If you are a pre-seed company, you give 1% to someone, it's worth maybe $100,000 or $10,000 even. And a year later, you reevaluate the cap table and that number has tripled. That's really exciting for that person. And so visibility into those kinds of stock option pools and other bonus incentives and things certainly motivate people. So I wouldn't ignore those levers in terms of management and compensation models.
Okay, I'm going to segue into something real quick because I think hiring is a great place to talk about your fractional work, right?
Sure.
And so, sorry, curveball, it's not in Notion. So basically, with the companies that you work with on a fractional level, but also looking at your experience as a design leader, I'm curious what your advice is. Hiring, we know the market is pretty shit right now. So what will be your advice from that perspective of how designers can differentiate themselves in a market where everybody looks the same way and we're emphasizing the same skills for everyone to upskill in?
I think experience is everything. So this is going to be tough news for new designers or people looking to get into the field. I think having a really strong track record in a particular industry or just having really strong testimonials from previous teams and clients you've served goes a really long way. In design, degrees don't matter as much as they do in medical industry or, other industries. So really it's about what you've done and who you've helped and what have been the impacts of the work you've done. So crafting a narrative around that, I think, is really important. Yeah.
Okay, so basically crafting a solid narrative around your work, but also figure out how to package the experience you've done in a way that does tell the story about yourself. Really?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, which is not quite what we were talking about in terms of fractional work.
I was going to come back to fractional work.
Okay.
So that's sort of a lead-in for whomever might be looking for work. On the fractional side of things, there are also people who are considering that as a pathway, whether it's staying within the industry without necessarily leaving, but then just leaving full-time work. One, what were your considerations for leaning towards that direction? And two, what's the advice you would give about what they can expect about fractional work and navigating it?
I moved into fractional because I'm easily distracted and curious, and this really satisfies my interest to learn. I was telling you I was learning about photogrammetry and imaging algorithms, and before that I was learning about blockchain, and soon I'm going to be kind of doing some one-on-ones on machine learning and deep learning. So curiosity is a big driver for me. I want to be out learning. That's kind of, I feel like if I learn about different industries broadly, I'll be able to identify patterns and opportunities within those industries really well as an entrepreneur. And I know I can offer a lot of value early on in companies when they're in their pre-seed seed stage. And so I have equity exposure at a time in the company where it's undervalued, potentially. So if I work with a company as a fractional executive for 6 months and I gauge that they have a really strong market opportunity, right? I've talked to all their customers. I know their leadership. I know how the leadership team is kind of working. It opens up an opportunity for me to get on their cap table for, small single digit percentages. But over time, as that company grows and as I continue to be a fractional executive, I've got different positions on multiple cap tables in different industries. So my investment portfolio, though high risk, is fairly well diversified. And that seemed to really work well for me as an entrepreneur as well. So not only do I get to build my own companies that I have equity in, but I can make a decent living while I get exposure to other really promising ideas and companies and potentially some positions on their cap table. And words of advice to folks who are considering fractional: people aren't really looking for fractional product designers. That's not as conventional as a fractional financial officer or a fractional marketing person or a fractional legal counsel. Those are all really high value, high ticket items that people have sought to reduce their outlay on. Product is still seen as a full-time position. And so I've found that I'm spending a lot of time educating my clients, potential clients, on how much money they could be spending by working with me and getting a lot more value out of that dollar spent. So I would just prepare anyone who's looking to do fractional product or fractional design work to be educating the team on that a little bit.
Okay. All right. So we're going to bring it back to entrepreneurship and wrap up here. So for founders, designers who are looking to be founders, or just anyone on their entrepreneurial journey right now, what kinds of, we've talked much about PMF, but are there certain tools and resources you can share to that effect about just sort of helping them guide their thoughts and learnings around?
Absolutely. There's a tool that I've become really fond of called Dovetail. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's a great resource for user research. It centralizes user research, and they're building tools to make sure you're getting good insights from your customers. So anyone who's starting off on their journey or is looking for a tool to improve how they're centralizing customer feedback, I think Dovetail is a really great resource for that. And I would say is one of very few tools that operates with such strong insight on the market that they serve, unironically.
Love it.
So you've talked about some of these resources, right? And I believe as a founder, there are some times that when you plan out something, the way you plan it, like it doesn't, most of the time, like five out of, or let's say 4 out of 5, it doesn't go out the way you plan it. And I don't know if if you've had that experience in your journey as a, three-time founder. So what are those pieces of advice you would love to give to someone, on that path, that's trying to get started at an idea, becoming a founder? What are those piece of ideas, word of wisdom, that you want to give to people who are leading at that front?
Don't give up. Fall in love with the problem, not the solution, and stay curious.
I'm laughing because your first statement was don't give up. Wow.
Yeah.
What have you been through?
Yeah, I know. It's real. It's very real. It requires grit and stamina for sure, and optimism, a little delusion, and ego, and the right cocktail of those things will keep you going for years.
Yeah, I think lately I've been hearing this word delusional, that as a founder or as someone who have an idea, you have to be delusional about your idea.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about it,
It's
like
true.
you have to tell yourself a lie, like, oh, my product, I'm gonna get like 4,000 users next month. So,
Well, that's not the delusion. The delusion is what I think of, at least, Emmanuel. When I hear the word delusion, is you have to imagine a world that no one else has imagined, and that thing and that image is going to come true. And it's not real. There's no evidence that it could be real.
yeah,
It is a delusion. It is an illusion almost. And you have to believe in that thing so much. And not to get too spiritual, but I think that is some of what the story of the Messiah is about. It's about someone who believed in something that didn't exist. It's about faith. It's about imagination and using using your faith to bring a new reality into existence. And and I would say, a lot of saints and messiahs were probably delusional, but and I know that there's a lot of entrepreneurs that are really delusional, but I think it's a necessary dose in the alchemy for success.
This has been incredible, Nick. Thank you so much. Like, we've basically gone through so many bits in our conversation. First of all, understanding how important product market fit is, and as well as just taking learnings from the common misconceptions that people get about PMF, but also just looking about the different kinds of ideas that pop up and how you choose the right one, how you validate it, how you focus on effective customer research to ensure that you're staying in alignment, you're avoiding bias as you build, and then building your MVP. We've talked about the different features that are necessary in an MVP, and also how to avoid overthinking the process. And finally, we talked about scaling and beyond, and I absolutely loved your talking about delusion as an essential mix of the right cocktail to drink as an entrepreneur, to believe that this world that does not exist, you can call it forth and it can come to reality. So this has been a great conversation. Thank you for your time and for your insights, Nick.
Oh, thanks for sharing it with me.
Yeah. All right. So before we go into the lightning questions, where can our listeners connect with you and learn more about your work?
I got a website, nickmcevily.com, and I'm on LinkedIn. So just feel free to find me there.
Awesome. Okay. So lightning round. Are you ready?
No.
Okay. So we're going to jump right into it then. All right. So what are the top 3 products that you use daily and you really love?
Google Maps. I love Google Maps. Spotify. I love Spotify's interface and the way they make me feel on a daily basis. And my calendar app. I live and die by my calendar. So
Yeah.
I can't live without that.
I can agree with that calendar. I couldn't live without it. But I'm curious about Google Maps. Where are you going?
I'm walking everywhere, going different places. I feel like, checking out new restaurants. I don't know. It's just a very useful tool.
I think I agree with Nick to Cause question. And I think Google Map has been kind of the most used app on my phone lately,
Yeah.
other than maybe Twitter out there. But other than that,
You're
yeah.
still on Twitter. Sorry, no
And
joke.
that's where I live. So
Absolutely, I promise. I take that back. No judgment at all. Okay, so Nick, what's one design resource that you keep going back to?
Unsplash, a image repository for creative license, free creative license photos that are pretty high quality. Also, Def to Stock Photo is another one that I think has really cool creative direction for folks. Yeah.
I love those. Okay, 3 books that you like to recommend to people.
Hooked by Nir Eyal, Jobs to Be Done by Tony Ulwick, and Lean Startup Manual by Eric Ries.
Okay, Lean Startup Manual. Sorry, we're typing as quickly as we can as you're speaking.
Gotta keep up with the lightning.
Yeah.
Nearly there. Okay, so if you were not any of the many professions you've been in your life, what would you be doing?
I would be a full-time carpenter, I think. I really love the idea of making furniture, building artifacts that outlive me and serve a genuine purpose in people's daily lives.
I love that. Okay. So wait, are you handy then?
I am, yes.
Okay, good. Because it's not like a fantasy. You
No, I think it's more of a retirement plan, actually.
love that. Okay, so favorite food?
Sushi.
Right.
Love
So
sushi.
Emmanuel, to catch you up, gave himself a stomach ache by eating maki rolls. You know how there are 8 of those. He had
Yeah.
3 times 8, 24. That is intense. Okay.
It was.
Favorite movie?
Favorite movie? I really love The Princess Bride. It's a good mixture of humor and romance.
Okay. I don't think I've seen that one. I'll go find it.
It's a classic.
Okay. Love that. Okay. Thank you so much, Nick. This has been wonderful. And to everyone, we hope that you enjoyed this episode as much as we did. Till next time. Bye.
Thank you, guys. Talk to you soon.